little two-step in there. There you go. It's different every week. Hey, welcome to Life Church. Good morning. Whether you're in person or watching online, I'm glad each and every one of you chose to worship here at Life Church today. Question: are computers males or computers females? You don't want to touch that one, do you? I can see that. They asked a group of people this, and they got a group of males together, a group of females together to weigh in on this. So the women group said computers are definitely male, and they gave 3 reasons. Number 1, in order to get their attention, you have to turn them on. 2, they have lots of data and are still clueless. And 3, as soon as you commit to one, you realize if you only wait a little bit longer, you could have gotten a better model. And the men said, no, the men said they're definitely female. Number 1, no one but the Creator understands their internal logic. Number 2, even your smallest mistakes are stored away in long-term memory for instant retrieval later. And number 3, as soon as you make a commitment to buy one, you find yourself spending half of your income on accessories. So we're in a series called The Game of Life, Navigating Sex, Love, and Marriage, and we're talking really in the series about the road of life and decisions that have to be made. Will we marry? Who will we marry? How do we stay married once that happens, and how do we understand our differences? And today we're talking about that, our differences. We've talked about singleness in this series. We talked about dating myths and marriage myths. We talked about 3 types of love: passion, partnership, and promise. We talked about difference between a covenant marriage and a contract marriage. Today we talk, though, about this whole idea of the battle of the sexes, how men and women are very different. And much of our conflict can be rooted in our differences. But I'm going to show you my cards at the very beginning of this message and let you know that really men and women are not the same. Men and women are very different, and that's okay. Here's the truth: men are not a mess, and women are not weird. At least not very much, right? And so that's what we're talking about today, because they are different, and the differences are good. Let's talk about some basic biblical principles of human sexuality. The Bible does talk about this. Genesis 1:26, a very foundational book, Genesis. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So God creates male and God creates female. And so we were created male and female to be different. To be different. And so the male and female, that was not accidental, that was intentional. We are different by design. Our tendency in relationships is to say, why don't you think like I think? Why don't you feel like I feel? Why don't you act like I act? What's wrong with you? In the reality, men are not so much of a mess, women are not that weird. The reality is we are just different, and it's for a reason. In this book, Dr. John Gray, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, that's what the whole book's about. How it's like we're from 2 different planets as he did his research. And he says, if you forget that men are from Mars and forget that women are from Venus, you're going to have Star Wars, he says, right? Because we're going to have conflict. And so the sciences actually support this reality of the differences. And I'm going to talk for a moment about the kind of the ABCs of differences between men and women. A stands for anatomy. We're different in how we're built. I don't need to tell you that. We kind of know that, don't we? But every cell in our body is different. You need to understand that. Down to a molecular level, we are very different. She has 2 X chromosomes, and he has an X and a Y chromosome. And so you have sex-related differences detected and documented scientifically from the time a child is 52 hours old. You start to see the differences between men and women, boy and girl, male and female. So our cells are different. Our blood's also different. Men have heavier blood than women's blood. They have 20% more red corpuscles, which means actually they have more oxygen in their blood, which gives them more energy. It's why women tend to tire more easily than men. Pound for pound, he can outrun her and he can outlift her. And so women also have an extra really layer of fat beneath their skin that men don't have. And it makes their skin so soft. And men think that's pretty special, right? And so it keeps them cooler in the summer, warmer in the winter, unless they're going through menopause and everything's off, right? Bones. Their bones are different. Men have larger bones than women. They're arranged differently. A woman's pelvis is wider than a man's, which forces her to exert more energy with every single step she takes. So that's another reason she tires more easily. And because her hips are wider, it creates that kind of hip shifting walk men like so much, right? I remember my youngest son Daniel was 8 years old. He comes home from school and he says, Dad, he said, you know girls walk differently than boys? I said, how do girls walk? He's like this. He was 8 years old, right? He's already picking this up, right? Because he is a player, right? He might be watching, so I just want to know that, yeah. Breathing, they breathe differently. Men breathe more slowly, more deeply. Women breathe more shallow, more often. Now, when they're frightened, that changes. When they're frightened, men breathe more quickly, and women stop breathing at all, right? When they're frightened. They have different cycles. Obviously, at any given moment, any given time, 18% of the female population is in their cycle. So be careful, men. A study was done. This is a true story. It's a true study. A 63% correlation between a woman's monthly cycle and committing crime. Another study found an 84% correlation. So PMS is real, and it stands for putting up with man's stupidity. That's what it stands for. You know, men go through a very similar cycle, but it's not every month, it's every single day. Many people don't realize that. It is actually. Their testosterone level does this throughout the day. It peaks at about 4 a.m. It's at its lowest is about 8 p.m. So ladies, if you want to make a big purchase, get him at 8 p.m. when it's less combative, right? That one's free. A is anatomy. B stands for brains, how we think. We definitely think differently. There's ample research that indicates that there's a very real physiological reason why women and men think differently. And the reason is something that confirms what women have known all along, and that is men are brain damaged. And that is actually true. Roger Sperry did a lot of research on this, on brain mapping, and came up with the left and right hemisphere. Left hemisphere largely about logic and factual analysis and concrete reasoning. Right hemisphere is largely about feeling, intuitive thinking, and creativity. But what happens is, what connects the left and right hemisphere is the corpus callosum. And the corpus callosum is this cable of fibers that connect left and right hemisphere. But on a female, it is 23% thicker than a male's. What happens at about the age of 18 to 24 weeks, when a boy is being developed in his mother's womb, the area is flooded with testosterone, and it actually hinders the development of the corpus callosum. So the fiber that connects left and right hemisphere is not as developed in a male as it is in a female. So women can communicate left, right, and men are just kind of stuck on one side most of the time. And usually it's kind of they're stuck on the right side a whole lot, or I should say on the left side a lot. And so this is a generalization, but on the screen you see behind me, men are more monominded, women are more stereominded. Right? And so men have a single processor, women have dual processors, right? And they're going back and forth a whole lot, which is why men have a hard time thinking in more than one thing at a time. We get focused, but women are very different. I mean, they can talk on the phone, cook supper, discipline the kids, cook supper, and clean the toilet all at the same time. Right? And men have a hard time doing that type of work. And so that's why a man can be physically present but mentally absent. He can only be at one place at one time. And if he's thinking about work, he's not at home. He forgets places. He forgets dates. He forgets the special things that stereominded women think so important. Because they're able to remind themselves when they forget. They go back and forth all the time. We can't do that as easily. For example, men forget birthdays. Here's a birthday card. It's a real card. For a very special lady on the day after her birthday. My love for you grows every day, so now that it's the day after your birthday, this card should be loaded with more love than if I'd given it to you yesterday. Do you think that works, ladies? No. I like the Valentine's Day one too. Let's make February 15th our Valentine's Day. So I did forget Helen's birthday. Where is she? I forgot Helen's birthday. Samuel was little, and it had been a crazy week. Of course, I was working. You know my story. I was really working way too much early in our marriage and a lot during our marriage, but especially in those early days of the church. And I was exhausted. I had a funeral that day. I came on. I had a suit on. Tie was loose. Came in, plopped down in the chair because I did a funeral that day, and just exhausted. And Samuel comes up, little kid. He comes up and he's smiling ear to ear. Dad, he said, "You know what today is?" And at that moment, I did. And I said, "Oh, of course I know what today is. It's your mother's birthday." And he's smiling, and over his shoulder, Helen's like this. "You forgot. You forgot." And I did forget her birthday. I forgot her birthday. It was terrible. This monominded guy could not remember. I like this one lady said. She said, "What a coincidence. You forgot my birthday? I forgot how to have sex." That's what one woman said. And there is controversy in my house because Helen is convinced I forgot her birthday twice. I still think it's only one time. But because she's stereominded, she's probably right. I'm not going to tell her that, but I'm telling you she's probably right. Okay. Ladies, the worst thing you can do is go up to your husband today and say, "Honey, 12 years ago today, remember where we were?" He didn't know where it was 12 days ago from the day. He's so mono-minded, you're stereo-minded. You have what's called crosstalk. You're going back and forth, constantly reminding yourself of things. That's why you could be in the middle of a sentence, ladies, and you crosstalk over, you think of something else, and you change the subject in the middle of a sentence. And the guy's going, "What are we talking about now?" Because we're mono-minded. We're not stereo-minded like you guys are. We're at a disadvantage. And this causes us to do all kinds of things differently. We shop differently, right? A woman can go to the store to buy a dress for herself, and she'll also pick up something for the neighbor's baby, right? Crosstalk, right? Men shop differently. We're mono thinkers, right? We go in, we go in, we see, we seize, we pay, we exit, right? We're done, right? But women, they're very different. Like, look at this diagram on the screen up here. Mission: go to Gap, buy a pair of pants. A man time 6 minutes costs $33. Female time 3 hours 26 minutes costs $876 for a pair of pants. We spend money differently. Men will spend $2 for something that costs $1 if he really wants it. We go shopping. Helen says, "Why'd you buy that? You bought the expensive one." I go, "I don't even look at prices. It looked good to me. That's why I bought it. That's the expensive one. But I'll buy something that's worth $1. I'll pay $2 for it if I really want it." A woman's the opposite, right? She will spend $1 on something that costs $2, even though she doesn't even want it. You know why? Because it's on. Oh, your wife's the same way. That's right. It's on sale. In fact, because she saved $1, she'll buy another one that she doesn't even want, right? Here you go. We just think differently. Men are more competitors by nature. Women are more contributors. Women are more relational. Men are a little more combative. Look at little boys in the playground. Who's faster, who's bigger, who's smarter, who's stronger, whose dad could beat up who. They don't talk about feelings or relationships on the playground, right? But women are very different than that. So for men, everything's about a competition. That's why when you're traveling, the man tells his 4-year-old son, "We're not stopping for another 200 miles to the next Buc-ee's," right? You got to wait 200 miles, son. We're not stopping. Why? Because it's all about conquering the trip. It's not about the journey. And that's why he won't stop when he's lost. He'll admit defeat. He can't do that, right? Remote control, he's a master of the remote. Mono-minded, click, 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 changing stations. She's stereo-minded. She can't keep up with all the stations she's clicking to. She's trying to remember everything, We're just very different. Baby girls smile more often than baby boys. Baby girls are more responsive to the cries of other babies than baby boys. Baby girls pay more attention to pictures of faces than baby boys do. And we don't really outgrow that. When you talk to adults, men and women, and you show them pictures of people expressing different kinds of emotions, women outscore men 2-to-1 on identifying those emotions. We're just very, very different. And so that's why a woman will cry watching a movie. We're going, you don't even know these people. It's imaginary. And of course, then we all yell at games and, yay! She's all, why are you cheering? You don't know these people. Why are you cheering for these people in the football game, right? It's real different. Men are verbal. Women are verbal. Men are more visual. Men are more visual. Men they see with their eyes. He's sexually stimulated by his sight. She's sexually stimulated by words and tender touches and romance, And women know that many men can see better than they can think. And so they keep that in mind, right? As one woman said, women will never be the same as men until they can walk down the street with a bald head, a beer gut, and still think they're beautiful. Men think that, right? We're a little out of touch. Women will solve problems by talking. She has to talk through it, right? Men are now-oriented, and women are future-oriented. Men think in the now. Think in the now. And so men aren't really concerned about the future. There might be a big balloon payment coming up here a year from now, but it's a year from now. Everything's good now. She's already nervous about that balloon payment coming up a year from now. She's thinking about the future, right? Men, if you have your wallets on you, hold your wallets up, man. If you have your wallets close to you, hold your wallets up in the air, hold them up. Okay, yeah, see that? Yeah. I mean, what do you got? You got credit card, ID, a little bit of cash, right? That's all you got. It's all about the now. Women, if you're physically able, hold up your purses, right? You got a 30-day supply of food, backup underwear. You got all kinds of things in that purse. While you're thinking about the future, we just think differently about those things. So how we think is very different. Now men, we're not off the hook here. Ladies aren't off the hook, right? Men, you got to be more verbal, right? We're different, so you have to try to be more verbal, right? Women, you have to spend more time in the now. Don't be so worried about the future. We have to learn to appreciate those differences in one another. I like these. I found this online, this diagram of a woman's brain, right? Her brain. You got all these shopping centers in the brain, right? Impulse shopping, talk center, extra talk center, I love the base of the brain, the I told you so gland. The center for long-term memory of men's mistakes. That's really great, right? And one of my favorite is the sex initiator particle. And here is the man's brain. Sex, even more sex. TV remote control. I mean, he has all these things. He has the lame excuses gland, right? I like this. The listening particle. And the toilet aiming cell. Anatomy, A. B, brain. C, communication, how we relate to one another. We relate differently as well. And again, these are definitely generalities, there are exceptions to rules, but we do relate differently. Men use noises, women use words, right? He's out there and he hits his thumb, he's speaking in tongues out there, right? What's he saying? Yeah. He's just different. If you take little 4-year-old boys, the Harvard study was done years ago. Harvard did a study of 4-year-old boys and girls on the playground. They found out that almost 100% of what little girls said was intelligible language. Intelligible. It's like, oh, I like your new dress. It's very beautiful. My mom bought it for me. Right? This is how little girls talk. But the little boys on the same playground, 32% almost a third of their language was not intelligible. It was grunts, screams, yells, psh, 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 gun noises. Right? Boys are just different than girls. And men don't always go out. Let's go to a restaurant. Let's listen sometime in a restaurant who's talking, right? Men are using one-syllable words every once in a while. Good, And women are all talking. There might be 5 women at one table. They're all talking at the same time because they're stereominded. They know what they're all saying at the same time. It's amazing. We just cannot do that. Psychologists tell us that women speak 32,000 words a day. Men speak 20,000 words a day. And so by the time you get home, you might both already spoke 20,000 words. Which means what? He's done, and she has 12,000 more to go. Here it comes. Men are bottom line oriented. Women are detail oriented. Want all the details. Every day, Helen will ask me one of the most difficult questions when I get home from work. She'll say, "What did you do today?" Well, I'm sure I did something. It was a good day. What did I do? Now, if I ask her what she did today, I ain't pull up a chair, right? Pull up a chair. It's going to be a while. She'll start telling all these stories about everything that happened, right? It's all about detail with her. Men tend to communicate for solutions. Women tend to communicate for sharing. Men are trying to fix things. Here's how, stop crying. Here are 3 ways to fix it, right? But if you're a young man, let me just save you a lot of headache. It took me forever to learn this. She's intelligent. She's probably smarter than you. You don't have to fix her problems. Just listen to her share. What? I don't have to do anything? Yeah. Just give her a hug and say, "I'm sorry, honey, I'm sorry." But she's been saying the same thing every day. I know, just hug her anyway. Just tell you're sorry. Just tell you're sorry. It's so much easier than trying to fix all of her problems because she just wants to share, right? Men tend to think internally. Women tend to think externally. Now, again, personality types will change this dynamic, but that is kind of how it is. Men tend to basically not talk until they know what they're going to say. They think before they talk. Women tend to think while they're talking. And that's not a joke. Like one woman said, "I don't know what I'm going to say until I start talking." Because she's an external processor. So ladies, you need to learn, let him be silent. I'm serious. He's trying to think. If you keep talking to him, you can't think. He's a mono-minded person. Silence is okay. Let him think. And men, let her talk and listen to her and talk to one another. Again, we're different how we relate to one another. And you can't say, "Well, I'm just, I'm an internal processor. I don't have to talk." No, you have to learn to value external processing, try to talk with her. We have to kind of learn, meet in the middle, but value these differences in one another. And one more, D is desires, how we experience need. How we experience need is different. Dr. Willard Harley did a study, Dr. Willard Harley Jr., he's a Christian counselor, thousands of couples over many decades, and he wrote a book called His Needs, Her Needs. On the screen behind me, you see the finding. This book is really old, by the way, and they keep updating it, but the data hasn't changed in decades. But these are the top needs of men and women, and just look at them. They're not a surprise, are they? Men have a strong need for sexual fulfillment. They have a strong need for affection, and down the line. You see financial support on her side. It's important to her that things are going to be secure. These are important to know, whether it be anatomy, how we're different physically, whether it be our brains, how we're different mentally, our communication, how we're different relationally, our desires, how we're different emotionally. We have innate, inborn differences between men and women. And so the idea that men and women are the same is fundamentally flawed because we are different. As Cambridge scientist Dr. Tim Clutton-Brock said, he says, "Only by regarding males and females as if they were 2 different species are we likely to understand why it is that the sexes differ so widely in anatomy, psychology, and behavior." They're just different, he says. They're different. After God created everything, in Genesis 1:31, it says, God saw all that he had made, and he said, "It is very" what? Good. After he made male and female, it is very good. The differences between males and females are good and are to be appreciated and celebrated. Appreciated and celebrated. We need to appreciate and celebrate men being men, and women being women, and boys being boys, and girls being girls. We need to celebrate that. It's very important. Of course, toxic masculinity is unacceptable and should be rebuked. But healthy masculinity and healthy femininity, it should be appreciated and celebrated. Can we take a moment and just clap our hands and celebrate the differences between men and women? It's a good thing. It's a good thing. Now, for a moment, I'm going to take a time out from this message about men and women and our relationships. I'm going to take a time out. I'm going to chase a rabbit for a moment. And I'm going to chase a rabbit because it's an important rabbit to chase, because we live in a world right now where this issue is front and center all around us. And the issue is transgenderism. And it's all around. It's in our schools. It's in politics. It's just all around. It's in news cycles. And there's so much angst and confusion So just for a few moments, I want to talk about this. And I think the best way to do this is to talk about these 6 terms you see on the screen. And as we understand them and differentiate them, we better understand what's happening. Biological sex, God created male and female. We talked about that already, that they're different. We're different down to our chromosomes, the molecular level. The biological males have XY chromosome. Biological females have 2 X's. And so we are different. Gender. Gender is a social or cultural expression associated with a biological sex. A social or cultural expression associated with a biological sex. For example, if you're a new mom or new dad and you're going to have a little baby and it's a boy, what color are you going to use in the gender reveal? Blue. If you have a little girl, what color are you going to use? Pink. Exactly. And so now, is there anything intrinsically male about blue or intrinsically female about pink? No. But our culture associates those things together. It's a cultural expression, a social expression. We have a guy in our church who plays a bagpipe and he wears a kilt. All right? Looks like a dress to me. But if you're in Scotland, it's pretty common. This guy, by the way, his arms are bigger than my legs. So I don't tell him it looks like a dress. I just smile while he plays. It's acceptable there, and it's masculine there, but it's not so much acceptable here that if someone walked around like that. In India, we spent almost a decade in India doing mission work. And I remember in India, a sign of friendship is holding hands. I remember walking down the street. We've been in India, first trip to India, walking down the street, been there about a week, and this guy, who was our translator, was walking next to me, and he reached out and he grabbed my hand. And the missionary over here smiled, and he smiled, and he said, looks like you met a friend. He said, welcome to India, right? Now, that would be different in America, but their friends is a very innocent way, and again, it goes back to a social or cultural expression. So there is a connection between gender and biological sex. Well, what we have to understand right now, what's happening today in popular culture is there is a severing of gender from biological sex. There are cultural connections, but that's being severed now. There's also gender identity, the understanding that males and females have an internal psychological self-awareness of being man or woman, an internal self-perception of being man or woman. That's gender identity. Then you have gender dysphoria, which occurs when there's an incongruence. There is a mismatch, a perceived misalignment between their biological sex and their gender identity. So a biological XY male may sense that his gender is a woman. And there's gender dysphoria. And so that's what's called gender dysphoria. Now, it's important to know that it's perceived. And so just because they perceive there's a conflict between biological sex and gender identity does not mean there's an actual, ontological misalignment, but it's perceived, and so it seems real to them. And so you also have transgenderism. And that's what we hear about today so much. And that's more of an umbrella term of people whose gender identity, gender expression, and gender behavior does not conform to the cultural expectations based on their biological sex at birth. Now, it's much broader than gender dysphoria, because gender dysphoria, you have a conflict. But in transgenderism, you're taking active steps in accordance with your gender identity that might be at odds with your biological sex. What does that mean? Well, it means you might dress like the opposite biological sex. It means you might take on a new name or a new pronoun of the opposite biological sex. It might mean that you take hormone replacement therapy. And the most invasive step would be to have surgery to cosmetically alter and reshape their physical appearance to match what they perceive to be their gender identity. Though it's impossible scientifically for a biological male to completely and fully become a biological female to the core, there are external adaptations that are attempted in transgenderism. And so Even though the reality is that the chromosomes cannot be re-engineered, there's an external attempt to accomplish that. And so in transgenderism, in the worldview of transgenderism, the psychological gender identity reigns supreme over biological sex. Psychological identity reigns supreme over biological sex. But what we have to understand is the subjective psychology of the mind can never override the objective biology of the body. They just can't, even though there might be a conflict between the two in tension. Now, it's also important to note that transgenderism and gender dysphoria are very different. As I said earlier, you can have conflict about your gender as it relates to your biological sex. That's a real conflict that's existing, and you might choose to live with that conflict. That's gender dysphoria. The transgender person goes beyond just living with the tension and tries to resolve it by making changes. Now, how do we respond to all this? Well, we should have compassion. We should have someone with gender dysphoria. Can you imagine that being one biological sex but feeling like you're something else in terms of your gender? And so we should have definitely compassion. And because people with gender dysphoria and people who identify as transgender have higher rates of mental health challenges, they're confused, they're hurting, they're depressed, higher rates in the general population. They have higher rates disproportionately of thoughts of suicide and actual suicides. And there also, I should note, is a difference between transgender people and transgender ideology. I would say it again. There's a difference between transgender people and transgender ideology. Transgender ideology asserts that a man can become a woman and a woman can become a man. It prevents people sometimes from speaking truths, that men and women are different, and sometimes it forces people to speak untruths, that men and women can change into one another. But there's a difference between the two. It's okay to take a stand against transgender ideology because it leads to falsehood in human nature, falsehoods in our belief of science, and it's contrary to Scripture. It's okay to resist, and I think we must resist transgender ideology, but it doesn't mean we don't love transgender people. You have to separate position from people. And right now they're getting really merged together. So you resist the position, but you love the people. Because we must love all people, even our transgender neighbors. People with gender dysphoria, who've had in our church, by the way. And by the way, our Christian worldview has an answer to all of this. What we believe as Christians is creation, fall, redemption, and restoration. God created all things. Things fell into sin. Jesus Christ came to redeem and ultimately restore all things. We believe that creation was created perfect. God created male and female in his own image. But then there was a fall, and with that fall came this brokenness and this misalignment in our created order, even to the basic level of our sexuality. So none of this should surprise us. If we're Christians, we should expect it. It's just part of the broken world in which we live. Some would say, well, shouldn't we affirm someone's gender identity because it might lead to self-harm if we don't? What we have to understand there is even those who've transitioned and had sex reassignment procedures still suffer from higher rates of depression and thoughts of suicide and actual suicides. In other words, social affirmation is not sufficient by itself to reduce the mental and personal strain. That's not the answer, just to give, quote, affirming care. And you also have now, this has been happening long enough, now you have 20-somethings, 24, 25, 26-year-olds whose parents helped them transition as children and teenagers who are now looking back and regretting and going, why did you guys let me do that? I wasn't old enough to even understand. And so now they're actually pushing against this idea of affirming care. Should we be loving and affirming of the people? Yes, but it doesn't mean we have to be affirming of actually changing who they are in that sense. And so we have to understand that studies show, at least one dominant study says, that 80% of the cases of gender dysphoric children, 80% of the time, if you leave them alone, 80% of the time, and just give loving care to them like you would anybody else, then 80% of the cases, they work it out before adulthood. If you interfere and start trying to get in there and help them with accommodations, they have a harder time working it out. And so maybe the best thing is just to be loving. And we also have to understand today there is a social contagion where it's a fad now to be transgender. And so you have kids who don't even have gender dysphoria. There's no confusion, but they're choosing to act out in transgender ways. Why? Because it's so popular now. It's a social contagion. So what do we do with the fad, with the confusion, and the ideological angst? Here's what we do. We speak truthfully, and we speak lovingly. We speak the truth in love. And I want to remind you, it's okay to have all the right convictions in the world, but if we are not compassionate and we are not loving, not only will we not win the right to be heard, we will not deserve to be heard. We must be as loving as we can be, as understanding, but we also have to hold up the biblical model, which we're talking about this morning. All right, back to the message. Genesis 1:27. Genesis 1:27, God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Have you ever noticed what this verse says? God created male and female, and it takes both of them. It takes both males and females together to fully express the image of God. It takes both males and females together to fully express the image of God. That means men were not enough. Women, you're not enough. It takes us together. Women are valued, men are valued to express God's image. And I'll even go beyond that in Ephesians 5:31. Paul quoting Genesis 2:24, for this reason man will leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, the two will become one flesh. That's a foundational passage on marriage from Genesis that Paul's quoting. This is a profound mystery, he says, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. And I say this every message because not everybody's here for every message, so I always repeat this because it's foundational. Did you know in the Old Testament and the New Testament, the husband-wife relationship is a picture of our relationship with God? And so it takes both husbands and wives together to fully express our relationship with God. So it takes male and female to fully express being in the image of God, but it takes husband and wife to fully express our relationship with God. That's how important this is. Christ, the groom, the male, the church, the bride, the female coming together. That's why every other form of sexuality falls short of heterosexual love, whether it be homosexuality or something else, because it falls short of the standard of this idea of fully expressing the image of God, fully expressing our relationship with God that husbands and wives represent when they come together. Genesis 2:18 says, the Lord says, it's not good for the man to be alone. I'll make a helper suitable for him. I'm going to talk about this helper thing next week. Ladies, before you walk out of here, understand, I'm going to talk about this again next week in more detail, but the word helper in the Hebrew language was also the exact same word was used of God, how God is our helper. Is God inferior to us? God's actually superior to us. He's superior. And yet so don't get caught up in that. We have a negative connotation in our culture. It wasn't negative in the Hebrew culture. But the key word I want you to focus on is the word suitable. The word suitable. It means to correspond to. Adam said, man, the pig, the rhino, hippopotamus, they don't correspond to me. But she does, right? When he saw her, she corresponds to me. And so the differences between husbands and wives are to complement one another for companionship, not conflict. God says she is suitable. She corresponds. She complements. Why? For them to be companions. Proverbs 2:17, talking of the husbands. He is the companion of her youth. Malachi 2:14, talking of wives. She is your companion and your wife by covenant. And so these two somehow come together for oneness, which is why Genesis 2:24 says, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, and they'll become what? One flesh. As they come together. Two different people coming together. Our uniquenesses contribute to our unity. Our uniquenesses, what makes us different, contributes to our unity. And this is seen most clearly, really, in a very tangible way in the sexual act. In the sexual act, what you have is what explicitly makes a man and a woman and makes them distinct. These two explicitly different body parts come together to what? Create oneness. The uniquenesses contribute to our unity. The otherness of one another doesn't have to. In fact, we come together not because of our differences, or we come together not despite our differences, we come together because of our differences. They unite us together. And one more passage, 1 Peter 3. 1 Peter 3, 7. You husbands must live with your wives with proper understanding that they are more delicate than you. Treat them with respect because they also will receive together with you God's gift of life. Husbands, he said, now, by the way, he wrote this to husbands, but there are implications for wives too. And he says, live with her, he says, with proper understanding. Literally, the Greek says, dwell with her according to knowledge. A husband and a wife are to live together according to knowledge. Knowledge of what? Knowledge that they're different. It says she's more delicate. The original Greek says she's a weaker vessel. Not weaker mentally, spiritually, intellectually, just weaker physically, he's talking about here. In the barbaric, brutal first century where women are abused, he says she's not physically as strong as you are, but don't mistreat her like everyone else does in the culture. Treat her with delicate. Be delicate toward her. Because she is different. Respect her. That word respect means to honor. It literally means to set aside, to actually put up on a pedestal. Like if you win an award, you don't put an award on the floor in the closet. If you win a trophy, it's not on the floor in the closet. You win a trophy, you lift it up, you put it in a trophy case. Peter says every wife is a trophy wife. Every wife is to be respected and honored and held up and lifted up for what? For their differences. That she's different than you are, he says. She's different than you. Husbands and wives need to understand and respect their differences. This entire message today has come to this point. This is your take home. From A, B, C, D, the whole out, we are different. God created us this way, and we need to try to understand that and not vilify each other. We need to try to respect those differences, understand and respect the differences. Not a source of difficulty, but a source of delight. Not a source of hassles, but a source of harmony. That our uniqueness creates unity, and we need to understand and respect that reality. I've come to realize that she's not me and I'm not her, and that's good. We need each other to be different. And we're going to learn to appreciate those things. And why does he say respect? He said respect because he says that she also will receive together with you God's gift of life. She also is a fellow heir of God. I mean, she's equal to you, but she's just different. And here's another reason he says as he closes out the passage. Here's why you should respect the differences, so that nothing will interfere with your prayers. I remember when I used to read that, I would think, what in the world is that about? I mean, God definitely is stereo-minded. He just changed the subject on us. I thought we were talking about my relationship with her. Or about talking about with you. And God said yes. The more you try to understand and respect this woman that I've given you as she's different, and you honor that, the more spiritual power you will have, the more less hindered your prayers will be. In fact, that word actually means to cut in, to interrupt. In a day that with cell phones, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Right? We understand this idea. Man, I can't hear anybody. God says, if you're constantly saying to me, I can't hear you. Can you hear me now? Maybe you're not understanding and respecting and honoring the differences. If you accept the gift I've given you and you accept it fully, it actually enhances, it becomes a spiritual issue, our relationship with God. Husbands and wives need to understand and respect their differences so that their relationships with one another and with God are not hindered. The more we understand, the more we respect, it helps our relationship with one another, also helps our relationship with God. It becomes a spiritual issue that we need to really embrace today. And so, we're different, but it doesn't have to be a battle of the sexes. Our uniquenesses can contribute to our unity. The very thing that makes us different doesn't have to divide us. It can unite us and make us even closer together. Father, I thank you so much for the fact that you've made us male and female. You have made us different. And you did it at the very beginning of creation for a reason. Intentional, not accidental. Different by design. And God, it doesn't have to be the source of conflict. It can be the source of complementing and companionship. Lord, the two different ones can become one flesh. Not all because we are different. And so, Father, we thank you for that. Lord, I pray today as these couples leave this place today, this week they'll ask one another, hey, how are we different? And how do our differences make us better? How are we different? And how do our differences make us better? And I pray we'll try to understand and respect those differences that can strengthen marriages and not weaken them. And we thank you for all this in Jesus' name.